Now, you can file this one under what do you have to do, right? Because this will tie into some of the broader things I'm going to be talking about over the next few days. What I've said about cancel culture is it's a very weird thing because I think people talk across each other, right? There's two types, essentially. There's the type where you're not really being cancelled in any sense of the word. It's basically you're being like criticised, usually not in good faith, with a view to have you on the end of a punitive measure of some sort. And generally, you know, it's big media figures that have huge audiences. Like, I mean, we've seen how it's panned out with Joe Rogan, right? And we saw how it panned out with Whoopi Goldberg. They were cancelled, but essentially they weren't, because Whoopi Goldberg said things that, by the way, you know, they do get kicked around by the alt-right. She just repeated a very dubious talking point about the motivations for the Holocaust, which she's completely wrong about, is completely ahistorical. And she said it on national television and got a 2-week suspension. Because the prospect for a network firing a black woman anchor during Black History Month, you know, it would have been, you know. So again, there's all these layers. So she was essentially immune to that. She even, on her apology tour, doubled down on it and insisted the Holocaust wasn't racist in any way, even though we know Hitler specifically felt that way and said so repeatedly. And then the other issue is, you know, with Joe Rogan, you know, Joe Rogan, obviously, his great crime, I think, is having doctors on that feel a different way about COVID to other doctors. And so people went back, trawled through, wanted to apply the pressure because the great achievement would be to deplatform Joe Rogan. And so they went back and they found him in 2010 and beyond saying the N-word. By the way, everyone did that in 2010. There was a whole episode about it on South Park. And not just that slur, the other slur. The problem with preserving tweets and preserving recordings is you can't preserve zeitgeist, can you? You know, it's changed now, but back then it was considered, as long as you weren't using the word in a racist context, it was fine to say the word, especially if you were quoting somebody. Now, we can't do that because Americans have murdered context. They have to murder context because context, without it, you can be impugned for anything. There's no defense. If they come for you, you're fucked. And so that, to me, isn't really cancel culture. It's just part of the ongoing culture war that is seeing people become more divided, more tribalistic, more dogmatic in their thinking. And that's just an extension of something that's been going on for a long time. For me, when I think of cancel culture, I think of powerful people like American journalists using huge media platforms to ruin the lives of just everyday people, non-public figures. And so that, to me, is like the cancel culture I repudiate and really strongly think needs to be pushed back against. What people don't like to talk about is that is the go-to weapon for the journalist class in America. It's how they keep you in your place, because everyone's got a bad tweet. Everyone's got a skeleton in the closet. You know, maybe you're at a traffic light and your hand relaxes into that position and somebody gets a photo of it and now you're a white supremacist. Or like the guy on Jeopardy who he'd won 3 times. So he went like that to show it was a three-peat and got caught, and journalists said, look at him flashing a white supremacy sign on. It's because journalists are just they're just garbage. The American journalist is a wretched, wretched creature who works in a field where jobs are shrinking, it's dying all the time. The only thing that gives them relevance is their ability to wield these platforms against people they fundamentally see as beneath them. And so they do, and they wield them with impunity. And they've made up a bunch of crazy bullshit, nonsensical language to justify it and explain it away. you know, American academia and who walk lockstep in with the journalist class. Remember, a lot of these journalists come from prestigious universities. They, using their connections and affluence, they just go straight from a prestigious university into a job in a newsroom with, you know, because they can afford to work for free, essentially, because they don't need to make money. Newsrooms are infested with these types of people and just spouting nonsense ideas that don't hold up to any scrutiny. In fact, if you look back the last 20 years, there's been this big push to create these linguistic terms that they are now like the arbiters of, and only they are smart enough to interpret, right? Like legalese for cunts. Well, and that's just legalese, isn't it? But yeah, but basically, you know, shit like dog whistles and microaggressions, and it's like, basically all it does is it allows you to put something on somebody else that they aren't doing. It gives you control over them without them even being a participant in it. But one thing I've noticed is, if you extricate yourself from the bullshit, if you want to essentially be a conscientious objector in the culture war, whatever that means, it seems to be relatively difficult to touch you, even if you are small, even if you don't have a platform to fight back when the journalist class comes for you. And in fact, even now, most Americans, you know, don't really know what cancel culture is, don't really care. It doesn't affect them or their lives or their communities. They've got much, much more pressing matters. And also, this is true for the marginalized groups that many of these journalists claim to be acting on behalf of. And we've got an example of that here over at Kotaku. Now, Critical Role, as we found out from the Twitch leak, weird, isn't it, by the way, that, remember how there was a part 2 coming? Because it definitely wasn't a former disgruntled employee who definitely wasn't trying to ratchet up pressure at a time when they were being called out for the hate raids. Weird how that part 2 never materialized and never dropped, right? And so Critical Role was revealed to be one of the most successful streamers, the most successful, if we think about success in pure like numbers and fiscal terms. And I have never engaged in role play, even though, well, that's the phrasing, right? I have never done like Dungeons and Dragons or any of that shit, right? Never, right? I've got all the books. I love it. I've told the story on stream before about the time I got invited to play Vampire the Masquerade, and when I got to the guy's house, he was all dressed up in like some fucking Victorian ruffled thing with fake fangs in. He was fully in, and it was too much for me. I couldn't do it. But then, like, you know, I think sometimes I've watched streams. Obviously, I say I'm a big fan of Matt Colville and his philosophy on game design, which I find, you know, he has a game design and storytelling, you know, just two things that fascinate me because, you know, I am a writer, essentially, or I tried to be, or I was. I don't know what I am now. Webcam guy, another one of those bald, bearded, bespectacled chuds with opinions about everything. What a sad, ignoble end. But anyway, I've watched D&D streams, and I think to myself, yeah, that's not all that bad. I could do that, you know. It doesn't seem that bad. You don't have to put on a voice or act, because that's the thing I always thought in my mind, because I got burned with that negative experience. I always thought it was going to be like amateur dramatics, which are notoriously terrible. Amateur dramatics with dice, it just didn't sound very appealing. But anyway, Critical Role are great at what they do. I don't have to be an aficionado on Dungeons & Dragons to know that they are really great storytellers, great voice actors, and they've done so much to build up this resurrection, this renaissance period that Dungeons & Dragons is having, you know, and also as well, just visually, if I said, show me some Dungeons & Dragons players, you wouldn't draw that picture. Now you do. Everyone does it. Your favorite streamer does it. It's sort of become normalized. I know it sounds weird that there's a stigma around it, but real talk, there's a stigma around it, and for, you know, for reasons. And I think as well, you know, we saw like Stranger Things, which, spoiler, terrible TV show, one of the most overrated TV shows of all time. But Stranger Things, it did a lot to bring it back with its, you know, cool retro aesthetic and everything else. So, yeah, you know, it's a good time for Dungeons & Dragons, and Critical Role have been instrumental in that success. I also know, from knowing the people involved in Critical Role, They're woke as fuck, right? They're on your team. If you want to think about it that way, if we make the culture war sports ball, and it's stupid to do it, and I don't do it, I've done it in the past. I admit that. I acknowledge that. I'll just watch from the sidelines now. I think it's fair to say it's all stupid, and it's getting stupider by the day. But they are on your team, and they understand that role play has to be broad. Your world building, especially at the inception of a session, it's broad strokes. Your players have to understand the world contextually easily early on so they can get into character and focus on the journey that character is going to go through. You cannot, like, sort of, and this is the minute, and like, overload it. And so as a result, a lot of tropes do sneak in. A lot of tropes, as in archetypal, settings. I mean, the Dungeons and Dragons setting itself is archetypal and broad and is a derivation of Tolkien fantasy. And so they're just going to sneak in. This is the dumbest outrage I've seen, because what they wanted to do for their latest campaign was they wanted to have diverse inspiration for the setting to get away from that tropey, typical fantasy setting we all know from a million games, a million books, a million movies. They wanted to do something different, so they decided that they would mine Southwest Asian and North African cultures, which, by the way, are very distinct in themselves, and good on Americans, because I don't think Americans understand how woefully ill-equipped their conception of the continent of Africa is. Like, for example, as I said, I've never really understood African American as a term. It seems to be part of the problem in sort of the erasure of identity, because Africa is fucking huge and has loads of countries, and like one country will have 16 distinct ethnic groups and 50 different languages. So it's like, when you say, oh yeah, that's Africa, innit? I think that's really fucking reductive. But anyway, they specified North African, obviously, if you know about African countries. Obviously, it's very certainly the difference coastally. And remember, it's massive. It is a huge, massive land. So, I think it was good. And Kotaku basically condemned them for, I know, some sort of weird, fucked up cultural appropriation, which isn't what happens. I've said this before. This is another one of those concepts, like the microaggressions, like the Darwin. Cultural appropriation is nonsense. It's a nonsense term. It's a nonsense idea. It's a nonsense concept. Nothing is appropriated. Nothing is stolen. Nothing is permanently kept. And it's especially ridiculous when Americans go, you're appropriating my culture. Yeah, but it only goes back to the 1700s. It doesn't go back. Anyone else, anywhere else in the world that has any claim to anything culturally prior to the existence of America, you don't count. You can't cry cultural appropriation, in fact. So it's not even, it's like, it's a classic American academic trick where they stack the deck full of nonsense and just ignore the rest of the world conveniently. The only cultures they're interested in is the way it intersects with American society in the here and now. European history didn't happen. Eastern European history didn't happen. African history didn't happen. None of that happened except in how it relates to the American story. Well, fuck that. I'm sorry. The world is bigger than you. And people really need to start saying that a lot more, because it's got to a ridiculous point now where digital spaces are dominated by American discourse, American problems, American ideas, and the rest of us are bigger than you, and we're sick of it. We are fucking sick of it. So please, just turn on just read a book from a non-American source just once. Get a passport. Fucking hell. Everyone is sick of it. And we don't talk about it because, these digital spaces are dominated. You got to have a Twitter account if you're in my game. Got to have, Twitch is Amazon. It's like, guys, it's fucking bigger than that. It's bigger than you. Anyway, I think wanting to draw from a different culture than the one that you would typically do, I think that shows reverence and respect of that culture. Like, I was always raised, like, when you go to a foreign country, you know, you dress like they dress. You follow their local laws and customs to the best of your ability. Do not be that belligerent tourist speaking English, you know, and try and learn some of the language, you know. And nobody back then, nobody would have said, oh, that's cultural appropriation, that Rich. They would have gone, yeah, good on you. And also, by the way, I've never been to a country ever in the world, and I've travelled all over the world, and I've never been to a country where anyone has been offended at me trying to adopt their customs. I've had a French person tell me I was embarrassing myself by trying to speak French, and then he spoke to me in fluent English, thus making my worldly PP feel very small. But that's it. That's the only time. Everywhere else I've been in the world, they are very grateful that you are interested in their culture. They are, you know, they appreciate that you respect the way they do things there. I've never thought of it anything except a net positive because of our global connectivity these days, that we are able to learn about other cultures from the cultures you no longer have to travel to the country to explore and find out about. I think that's a good thing. And I think looking at the different ways in which we share the human experience, what could be better for breeding empathy, right? However, what I've just said is radical right-wing nonsense, apparently, as Kotaku is about to explain. Let's have a look at the problem with Critical Role's latest campaign. In early fall, the hugely successful Dungeons & Dragons actual play series, Critical Role announced plans for their third campaign set in a fictionalised world of, I'll say, Marquette. It might be a silent T. But I'll say Marquette. While the campaign would draw inspiration from real-life SWANA, Southwest Asian North African cultures, the group would work together with sensitivity consultants to craft a fantasy continent free of appropriation, according to Matt Mercer. I mean, how much more can you do? So first of all, you consult with people from that region to make sure it's a accurate representation. And then you also bring in, like, a fucking sensitivity consultant, whatever the fuck one of those is, and basically that's just someone who goes, I am not offended, this is okay. And of course, irrelevant when it goes out, because as this article proves, someone will always be offended because recreational outrage is a very real thing. Mercer sounds earnest enough, and it's nice to see them be proactive about hiring consultants right off the bat instead of waiting to be called out on a misstep. Yeah, because now there's this thing, what is it they call it? I think it's risk modeling is the term they use. I don't know if you guys know about this, but basically, if you work in any sort of American corporate setting these days, they do this thing, risk modeling, for any idea, piece of content, advertising campaign, you know, whatever it is. You literally sit in a room and you go over all of the ways it could potentially offend somebody and cause a huge outrage and backfire. That's the thing. That's part of the creative process now. So yay. Go you. So why were some people so mad at them? By some people, randos on Twitter. Why is anyone mad at anyone? Because people like to get mad. When the campaign was initially revealed, the criticism from the tabletop role-playing game sphere and from SWANA, is that just SWANA? Did they say that? I don't know, whatever. Creators like myself boiled down to Critical Role making a financial killing off the aesthetics of cultures not represented in the actual cast makeup of the show, which is made up entirely of white people, save for a new guest member. There was also a healthy amount of apprehension as to how respectfully the world was being built. So, tipped your hand a little bit there, because the larger part of that isn't, are they respecting the culture? It's that these people are making a lot of money, and I'm not, and I don't like that. Now, you could always get skilled enough at something, so you're not having to write shitty little hit pieces at Kotaku, and then you get to make some money, but far be it from me to suggest that. No, in fact, what you should be paid for is your grievances. That makes sense, right? After the campaign was announced in October, critical attention gradually ebbed away as the discourse wheel continued to turn. But on December 10th, Critical Role released the intro sequence for the third campaign, a dramatic music video that cuts between the cast members at the table and themselves in costumes, exploring an unseen fantasy environment. It appears to be an innocuous, silly video where the cast members sing, make over-the-top expressions, and roll dice in intense slow-mo. But the overlying aesthetic is what plays the critical role, she's done a pun, in the reignition of the discussion. This attire might seem inspired by you can see here, like a reenactment of the Dr. Jones video by Aqua, isn't it? This attire seems inspired by franchises such as Uncharted, The Mummy, and Indiana Jones, and the classic adventure serials that influenced those stories. But those are charged colonialist stories for people of colour. Yes, these costumes are functionally harmless as anything is on a purely aesthetic level, but they speak to a legacy of disregard and disrespect to colonised cultures, often robbed, literally, of their material heritage and ancestry by the outside explorer who represents a large power structure. Bet you didn't know that. Bet you didn't know Indiana Jones was a filthy fucking colonizer, sorry. He was out there literally punching the Nazis, of course, but it's never enough. It's never enough. Got the Holy Grail back. Stopped Hitler having it. Not enough. Not enough. In the endless purity testing of woke idiots, that's not even enough. I stopped Hitler getting a holy super weapon. Nah, it's just that fedora, though. That fedora is charged with a violent history. Fuck me. I mean, yeah, actually, thinking about it, there were a few scenes. I mean, the opening scene specifically. Yeah, he did rob them natives too. I guess, look, he's a complicated character, isn't he, Indiana Jones? He's got daddy issues. He's named after the family dog. Yeah, thinking about it, Indiana Jones is a bad example, actually. Let's just skip that. We'll skip that, because that feast scene is out. It remains outrageous, doesn't it? It was outrageous. I think it was outrageous at the time, honestly. I mean, because, you know, remember watching that with my Indian godmother at the house. You know, chilled monkey brains. Oh, fucking hell. Anyway, the desire to protect and preserve history in a museum is an admirable one. But even the most heroic and selfless of the fictional explorers in those classic tales is still stealing from the people indigenous to the foreign lands they explored. Removing these artifacts from their homeland to be displayed elsewhere also suggests that the people of these cultures are incapable of being responsible for the preservation of their own history. The consequences of these narratives, both real and fictional, persist to this day, with many museums in the Western world boasting catalogues of artifacts acquired through colonialist means. So that is the crime. Like, you can't dress up like Indiana Jones. Then it talks about Orientalism, which you don't have to get into it. I'll spare you that. Since that intro sequence was released, the campaign has continued and now has over 12 episodes. It thus far exists in a strange half-space between Swana-inspired set dressing and the standard familiar high fantasy naming conventions of the show's previous campaigns. There haven't been any outright offensive descriptions or actions taken. They wrote disappointed. But the way the cast members roleplay through the world has felt exactly the same as their previous campaigns. Nothing signifies Marquette as a unique world other than the aesthetic of it. In the end, despite their dedication to creating an appropriation-free world, they fail to present us with anything of substance. All their research and sensitivity efforts pay off in a world that is little more than window dressing. I wonder why! I wonder why! They can't even dress up as Indiana Jones without getting wrecked. What next? Imagine if they'd wore regional specific clothing. Oh my God! Oh my God! What would the article say then? How dare you wear those clothes? So the article simultaneously repudiates them for being offensive, while acknowledging they've not done anything offensive. And also says, why haven't you gone further into exploring this world culturally that we will tell you are appropriating as soon as you do? They just set these traps. Oh, and I'll just read you the last bit. Just because. It's staggeringly terrible. With Critical Role being as influential to D&D as it is, it's highly likely that Wizards of the Coast will release official market-branded content, which will then become the de facto Swarner-based fantasy setting for mainstream table gaming for years to come. And this is understandably worrying to many Swarner people working in games, particularly in tabletop circles. Some express their discomfort only to be hounded by defensive fans. Much of that defence manifests as fans insisting that the cast members are good people, which they very well may be. But good intent doesn't matter. Good intent doesn't matter when the end result is harmful. It doesn't mean jack shit if you promise to be moral and responsible with your depiction of other cultures and then publicly condemn anyone who is made uncomfortable by your actions. Something, by the way, Critical Role haven't done. With a platform as large as theirs, the members of Critical Role must understand that every action they take is one that will echo and reverberate across their fans and tabletop communities as a whole. The Critical Role team has a responsibility to acknowledge the colonial origin of the exploration aesthetic they perpetrate, and, if they are as devoted to doing good as they insist, a responsibility to dismantle their legacy. You can't act as a company but expect to be forgiven like a person. If content creators like the members of Critical Role continue to profit at this scale, again, it's all about the money, it's all about the money, it was just all about the money the whole time, it was about the money. They have to understand that they will become beholden to public opinion. Material wealth has material consequences. It's no longer just a group of friends. It was never just a game. Right? An article of absolute fucking nonsense, which, you know, it's Kotaku. It's not even the last gasp, you know, partially good Kotaku. It's now the totally, terminally awful Kotaku because, as I said, Stephen Totillo fucking peaced out and he was sort of the last bastion of sense over in that fucking madhouse. Anyway, that article's terrible. And it's as terrible as anything Kotaku put out. They just put out terrible articles all the time. You can go there anytime. Just look at the front page. Bang. Terrible article. Terrible take. Fake outrage. Bang. Here's why Trump still matters. Bang. Just garbage. Like, just review a fucking game sometime, maybe. I don't know. Whatever. But what was interesting about this is the article didn't even go over well with the Kotakuites, which is now a term. The Kotakuites rejected the article, quoting the line, "This may seem like an overly cynical and bad faith interpretation of what Critical Role is doing with this new campaign. Overeducated economist says it's amazing that you realise this and yet doubled down on it anyway." Someone says, "In the end, it really is just Dungeons and Dragons. It has inspirations from other cultures. It also has dragons and talking robots and people who can shoot fire from their hands." And then, this is a good comment from Bippity Boppity Boodles. "You see, by putting in that proviso, they get to sweep that interpretation of their article to the side as illegitimate. It's true, it's a linguistic trick. This guy's a media student. I don't make the rules, but that's how they work. This allows them to then proceed to engage in the overly cynical and bad faith interpretation, because at the end of the day, that's much easier than trying to engage with a topic in a good faith way. I mean, would you rather write an article that won't get noticed because it's not spewing venom, or would you rather throw a bunch of grenades that will get lots of emojis and retweets in corners of Twitter where the whole game is basically a bunch of rubes and half-wits mistaking trite, empty one-liners with sage wisdom? If you can't understand the reason for doing the latter, then all I have to say is you just don't get it. It's not my job to educate you. You are valorizing white institutions and white ways of knowing and how you choose to interpret that sentence." That's clever, see, because he's done, media student, he's done the thing she did by doing the bad faith interpretation to sweep aside criticism of his comment. Actually, really, a clever comment. Never thought I'd see the day. Someone says here, this is VG Roller, or VGI Roller. "So, a solution?" And this is addressing the author directly. "Sounds like you don't want them to explore these cultural identifiers and the explorer genre tropes. Should half the cast be fired and people you find approved be playing this game instead? I mean, damn, this just feels like another example of well-intentioned people trying to make new diverse content and doing it right, and according to you, they never will. I want to have a conversation about this. I want to be open to your fair criticisms, but it also sucks to know that these are decent folks making decent content and they will never measure up to your standards. It also means that, again, decent progressive folks are bickering amongst each other in the general zeitgeist. And if the really dangerous conservatives, the really dangerous ones, had their way, all of us with a progressive slant would be on more than a back foot. So what is your solution? Or is this just a criticism with no answer? Now, this is interesting because this is something that I wanted to talk about and tie to when Lindsay Ellis got fucking cancelled. There's this thing that really does go on where it's like you can, right, conservative cancel culture, as I said, exists. There, you know, these people that like say, you know, facts don't care about your feelings or whatever. They catch feelings real quick if you insult their religion, right? They catch feelings real quick if, you know, you try and say, well, maybe we should get rid of the Second Amendment. So it's just two sides of the same coin, both sides engage in it. But what's interesting is the right wing, the reason you end up with what I think is lovingly known as the chudosphere, the reason the chudosphere can exist is like there's this fundamental understanding that because all the institutions are out to get us, we should sort of stick together and we will ride or die on every stupid, hypocritical talking point as one all at the same time. It's why, you know, the Ben Shapiro show gets more shares on Facebook than everything. There's this sense that we must all pull together. And so that unified front is essentially what enables the precipitation of terrible conservative rhetoric around certain topics to just exist and exist en masse. And not only exist en masse, like I said, it's just ubiquitous. It's everywhere because they spread it everywhere all at once, even if it's riddled with hypocrisy, flaws, and other stupid thinking. Meanwhile, generally in the, I don't even know what you would call it, if the right wing's the chudosphere, I don't even know what you would call it on the left. The point is they don't really do a good job of sort of standing together, standing with each other, and eventually on a long enough timeline they wait for how it's, there's a more snakish element to it. I think a lot of this critique, it's all about climbing the ladder or riding on coattails. So you'll have some fucking bum journalist write a hit piece about somebody who their politics completely align with theirs, by the way. There's no way anyone on, like, if they were to sit down and have a meaningful topic on all the things that would define you as being liberal, left, progressive, whatever you want to call it, they would completely align and completely agree. It's this one minor issue, right? It's this one very minor, meaningless issue. Like, can you wear Indiana Jones outfits, essentially, is what it boils down to. And you're saying it makes me feel uncomfortable. And on that basis, you would take these people's money away. That's just not going to fly with me. But they do it all the time. They really love to get the person that's above them in the ladder, even though that person has a bigger platform and they're saying all the good things and all the things they agree with. There's this little fucked up thing where they go, that should be me. That should be me. I should get to do it. You can't. And so you end up with this like weird fucked up infighting. And it's not drama. It's really vitriolic. And you have your progressive card pulled from you. And like I said, it happened to Lindsay Ellis. All Lindsay Ellis did was say, aren't all of these films like The Last Airbender? Right? Isn't all this young adult fiction like Last Airbender? And someone said, oh, well, you know, at a time when Asian hate crimes were on the increase, you would diminish Asian art. That was it. She was done. She was fucking toast. Think about ContraPoints. ContraPoints, you know, I think makes great content. Watched a lot of her work down the years. Some of it's a bit silly. As I said, there's one where, you know, like dog whistling is just, when I studied sociology, it was like called a reserved chord or something, a coded language, semiology, all of that shit. We had different terms for it. Yes, obviously we know it exists. The fundamental difference with dog whistling is before the person who was speaking the code set the code to keep you out. Now, with dog whistling, it's some progressive telling you, I know what you think because I'm smarter than you and you're a chud. It's a reversal, and it's not real, and it's just about power. And she did a video where she was saying, like, oh, you know, if I do this, it's like I'm definitely dog whistling, 100%. And, so I can't fuck with stuff like that because you cannot know somebody's mind, and to ascribe the worst intentions to them generally isn't a good way to have a sort of good faith discussion. But anyway, she's great. She got wrecked as well for appearing with somebody that was also on the naughty list. And this is the problem. Guilt by association, they love that too. And this is the mirror. The difference between, progressives and chuds, the difference is the chuds will walk in lockstep, they won't. If you're unpersoned on the left, it's permanent. If you're problematic, it's permanent. And so even though I don't like left-right thinking, because I think it's really dumb, that certainly are the lines and the divisions that are drawn currently in this American-centric culture war bullshit. So anyway, that makes a very astute point, that all of this bickering, like when you deplatform a progressive, what are you really achieving? I saw it, I wouldn't describe Destiny as a progressive, obviously. I don't think he aligns with that part of the political compass. I think he has a lot of ideas that would fit into that, but I think he has a lot of ideas that are fundamentally at odds with the ideology that subset of people ascribe to. He was willing to go, and like I say, this is why I'll always have more respect for him as a political commentator, even though he does fall into that trap occasionally where he goes, "Oh, you're a gamer, so you can't have you expressing a political opinion is ridiculous. Me, not a gamer, former StarCraft pro, my political opinion is better than yours." But, that's fine. We all do that. We all have an inflated self of sense, especially if you're a broadcaster or a streamer or whatever. We all have an inflated sense of self. We all have an ego. You have to have one to express your ideas into a webcam. You believe your ideas are worth expressing. So anyway, he was willing to go out and campaign, to help get Democrats elected. And people rejected him for doing that because he said some bad things. He had an interview, I think, with Andrew Yang. I think Andrew Yang's a really interesting political figure. I like him. I can get behind a Yang or a Gabbard. They represent an evolution of what the DNC should be. I could have got behind Sanders, honestly. Champagne socialist though he is. It's just the old guard in the DNC are the thing that I reject. Otherwise, I guess if you had to ascribe me to a party, I'm ostensibly a Democrat. Just not this Democrat Party. But anyway, and they rejected him. Meanwhile, you've got other popular fucking streamers. They just sit eating for 8 hours, spitting out talking points and reading headlines from articles that they don't understand without any grasp of political history, despite the fact they claim they've been politically active and politically knowledgeable for years and years, but they can't remember 4 years back. They can't remember 6 years back. They don't even think to look and see, has my team ever done the same thing I'm now criticizing? And they fall into that trap all the time, because all you have to do is just say what's on the front page of Vox and you'll get money. And they don't actively do anything. And so it's like, how can you respect that type of person over somebody like Stephen? Right? It's just an awful, backbiting, nasty, no sense of community. It's a terrible place to be. And trust me, it's coming. The people who are at the top right now who think they're untouchable, it'll come for them. It'll come for them. It always does. It always does. The hit pieces will come. You're useful now. You may be too big and too unassailable now. The articles will come. A journalist will want to try it and test you. And once your name is shit, all those people that turn up to give you all that money, they're going to go away because they're not with you because they like you. They're with you because they like the message. They're with you because they want to belong. They're with you because they want to be in the in crowd. And as soon as you're on the outs, they're not going to be there. And everyone finds this out. The only person you should be true to is your fucking hardcore fans, the people who like you, the people that respect you. Says here, maybe they thought that dressing up in traditional attire of cultures that aren't their own as white people would have been 10 times worse. And then someone here, Random Burner 87, says, well, that would have been the complaint instead. And it's absolutely correct. They put you in these, again, the reason that these, made up bullshit sociology phrases are loaded the way they are is that you cannot win. Represent our culture. Okay. Cultural appropriation. These things are at loggerheads with each other, yet I'm expected to do one while not doing the other. It's a game. It's a game, and it's about keeping you, jumping on the endless eggshells. This is a Amontillado Wolf. I understand people's reticence to this. I'll also say, by the way, listen, if you read Kotaku, you are fucked on some level. And if you're a commenter on Kotaku, you're even more fucked than that, right? But I will say they have a really good class of commenter over there. They do. I can just picture these effete liberal types with a glass of cognac as they type on their expensive untouched keyboard, completely free of crumbs. I understand your reticence. They've got a great class of commenter over there. I understand people's reticence to this, especially if you belong to the culture this particular fantasy-inspired campaign exists in. But if your example boils down to them wearing some costumes in a silly promo piece that explorers used to wear, well, then that's not a lot. If they were playing characters from this new region, or had worn costumes representative of the region of this campaign, you would have slammed them for cultural appropriation. Matt Mercer has talked many, many times about how many sleepless nights he has had trying to make Critical Role and its community as accepting and free as possible, and the efforts he's taken to represent different cultures respectfully. I would posit the question, see, great, what distinguishable, noticeable harm have they caused? And wow, the amount of angst in this article about a group of friends who make great money putting on a fantastic show is embarrassing. They've raised millions for charities and done so much good for local LA charities as well. I really wonder if you just walk around assuming every financially successful person has some secret evil agenda. When people say liberals are eating their own, I tend to disagree. But man, do you give people that belief, that statement, plenty to eat. This is a freaking buffet for them. And I'm sorry, homie, I was with you right until the end. Unfortunately, that is the nature of the game. If a big part of your ideology is based on purity testing, eventually people will fail. It's as simple as that. You remove that and get back to where we were at 10, 15 years ago, and it was like, listen, intent matters, context matters. This person has said a no-no word, but did it in an ironic fashion, so it's okay. We know they're not a racist, No. And I suppose this one will be a good finisher. No one is so mad. It's just 20 people on Twitter. To a journalist, that's all it takes. I've seen just as many people be happy to be represented and feel seen by the campaign. This is weak clickbait, outrage journalism. A bad look and a bad take. You have described all of Kotaku's output for about 5 years. Probably longer. So, that was the Critical Role outrage. I don't even know if it can be called that. But certainly they attempted to manufacture one because, why not, eh? Why not?